Hello and welcome to Reroll. My name is Angus Morrison, and if you've watched any of my older videos, you'll know I do enjoy ranting about writing, specifically about the way many AAA games can't produce more than a B-grade script, or a story which manages not to conflict with the mechanics at your disposal. But really, I know very little about writing for games. I know it can be naff, I know it can be excellent, but the process of getting it to the stage of being naff or excellent is something of a mystery. So this interview is for anyone who has ever wondered what goes into writing for games, how it differs from writing for other media, the role of writers on a development team, and how you might try your own hand at the dark art. I had the very good fortune to speak to Iain Lowson, who has written for everything, really. Iain has worked with Midway, Ubisoft and Relentless on games as varied as the Driver franchise to the Blue Toad murder files. On top of that, however, Iain has written for countless magazines and even found the time to pen his own tabletop RPG series. But I started from the beginning, asking how on earth he found his way into games.
The job title was very much something I figured I could do. So I contacted the agency that was advertising the job, and they refused to put me forward for it because I didn't have experience.
Charming.
And I said, look, the company advertising says you don't need any experience. They don't mean that. And I'm like, well, if they didn't mean it, surely they wouldn't have said it. And they said, no, they always mean that you need experience. What, apart from when they say you don't? No, they don't mean that. So this went round and round. So eventually I went to a different group, Creative Personnel, and I said to them, look, can you find out who's advertising this job?
Yeah.
Because they say you don't need experience, but this other agency says you do. But it's them saying it, not the client. And they went, oh, go on then, we'll have a go. And it turned out it was Midway in Newcastle, and another company sadly no longer with us. And they put me forward to it, and I got interviewed 3 times, I think, for that.
But you had no experience.
Yeah, I got interviewed 3 times, and I got the job, basically. So from nothing, I went straight into a big studio, and straight onto a AAA game. And was I wouldn't say I was out of my depth. I learned very fast. But yeah,
Culture
that's
shock.
kind of how I got into it. Oh God, you've no idea. I hadn't done an office job for years and then walked into that. So, yeah.
So having made that big transition, what would you say really distinguishes writing for other media from writing for games?
I mean, writing is always an iterative process. You always, you write something, you edit. Writing for games is like that, but more so. It's the best and worst aspects of writing in committee. And the bigger the company, the more people, sorry, my wife's just nudging me in the corner. Hello, dear. Keep that.
She's now internet famous.
What life of an aspiring writer. All writers are aspiring. Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying.
Perpetually.
It's a very iterative process. You're always having to take on the feedback from any number of other people, any other number of departments, because you haven't got just say a producer or an editor sitting on you. It's got to be work with the art department. It's got to work with the design department. Obviously, it's got to work with every other department, audio as well. So they all have feedback into what you do, and the bigger the project, the more people you have feeding into it. So yeah, it's a very, very collaborative process. It's a very iterative process. For example, I worked with Ubisoft, their Newcastle guys. I was one small cog in the massive wheel that produced Driver San Francisco. And I was part of a team that was brought in from my agency Sidelines to write effectively the BART dialogue. So every time you jumped into a car, there would be a conversation between that you would hear sort of one side of or 2 sides of or whatever going on. And to keep that fresh, there were hundreds of those conversations written. And then you got your BART dialogue, which is hundreds and hundreds of variations of go faster, go slower, turn here,
Yeah.
turn there. What are you doing? That was great. That was terrible. So really, the bigger the project, and then if you can imagine taking that onto a Call of Duty game, where you've got 1,000 different versions of "I need to reload."
Yeah.
All of those need written, checked, recorded, and sometimes the writer will be involved, or one writer will be involved in, for example, the recording process. So yeah, that's your one end of things. You take on something like Blue Toad or one of the smaller games, but one of the mobile games, and you'll generally have one guy writing the whole lot, and that can be a more satisfying process.
Hmm.
Generally, a Blue Toad, that was to date probably the most fun I've had in video game writing.
How much input do writers tend to have in the development process in those other areas? Like, how much can a writer influence the mechanics, the gameplay?
It varies hugely. I mean,
Yeah.
it really depends. It depends on, mostly, it'll depend on when the writer's brought in. And sadly, most of the time, a lot of the time, it becomes what Rhiannon Pratchett refers to as a wallpaper job, where you're brought in at the end, or significantly through the process, and all you're left able to do is just slap a coat of gloss over what exists anyway.
Yeah.
That, I have to say, is changing a lot more often. I find, certainly over the past 2-3 years, people are saying, let's get the writing in early.
Yeah.
And I think
it makes sense.
It does. I mean, but I think that's down to the efforts of people like Rhiannon, who have very definitely said, look, for God's sakes, guys, if you want your story to work, the story needs to come in early.
What about voice acting? Because voice work in games is often slated for being kind of disjointed, stilted, lacking in the flow of films and television, which I think is an unreasonable request, but there it is. Is there any kind of directive input from writers?
Sometimes, and again, it's happening more. What tends to happen with audio is, with the audio recordings of the dialogue, for a start, it is hen's teeth rare for two people who are having a conversation to be in the building at the same time, much less
sounds
in
ridiculous.
a booth at the same time. So what tends to happen is one of them records all their half of a conversation, and then often someone will come in and record their half of the conversation without ever hearing that first half. So, and often, sadly, without even being given perhaps a full script, they're maybe given a spreadsheet with just their dialogue on it.
So that's where that disjointed feeling comes from.
Because they're often given no context, which is something that having the writer there can help with, particularly if you're dealing with star talent who are bloody expensive.
Yeah.
You don't always get the chance to get a second shot with them.
Yeah, from my perspective, I've noticed maybe less evolution in scripting in the past few years and more of an increase in the number of like big names that you get from film and elsewhere bringing their voices in. Like Bethesda, they're always very keen to show off their voice talent. Ellen Page is the face of Beyond Two Souls. Do you think that's a worthwhile investment? Is like the appeal to the popularity of better established media something we ought to be pursuing?
I think talent is talent. I think it depends how it's used. My concern is, it's a similar thing. There still remains an obsession with, and it's one I really strongly dislike, with, let's get this person in because they're a Hollywood writer. Simply having that name will not make the game good. What it'll do is it'll make people expect more. And if that expectation is not matched by the script the actor says, by the way it's all edited, by the gameplay itself, then all it does is raise people's expectations and make them hate the game more when it doesn't meet those expectations.
Yeah. And you've been contributing to the industry for a few years now. And do you feel things are improving? Has the industry kind of changed its attitude towards writing?
I think so. I'd love to say that I've got bags of experience to draw on, but that's not entirely true. Um, I I think for me, the thing that I've seen is like I say, that the calls are coming in to say, right, let's bring these guys in earlier. So that's got to be for the good. I think companies, some of the big names companies, you've mentioned Bethesda, I think Valve as well. I think they've shown that good writing treated properly can really lift a game. So I think people are the industry is starting to understand writers, and writers are starting to understand the industry, and that's kind of key.
It's interesting that you mentioned Valve, actually, considering how many of their games deal with silent protagonists. But if you had to pick an example of a well-written, well-executed game, what would you go for?
Limbo.
Well-written?
Yeah.
Please elaborate. I'm intrigued.
Limbo was one of my favorite games for the way the setting and the story worked so well with the game. The nice thing being that, to a large extent, the audience were trusted. It was that kind of thing of, we're not going to spoon feed you this.
Yeah.
Do some work, figure this out, see what's here. And I loved that. Limbo was such a powerful game.
So, with anyone watching with an interest in writing for games, where would you recommend they start?
With writing. It's as simple as that. It's odd. I was talking the other day on the radio with someone who is dear to both of us, I believe. Just talking about writing. I mean, if you want to write. If you want to write for games, write stuff that isn't for games, because you're going to need that when you go to your first game job.
Yeah.
There are jobs advertised, but the obvious way is by going in through QA or whatever, like everybody always says. I think those ways are kind of starting to shut down.
Yeah.
But there's no reason why you can't, hang around the modding boards, the guys who are doing their infinite Skyrim mods, and say, okay, I'm a writer, and here's the stuff I've written already.
Yeah.
Not, I want to write for games, so what have you written? Nothing.
Give me a shot.
Guess what?
Let me in.
Because I got my first game job, and weirdly, quite a few since then, because of what I'd done in role-playing.
Yeah.
And writing my own system, and also in other role-playing jobs I'd done, and a little bit of even just the two very small comic book things I did for Games Workshop, and oddly running live role-playing events. I've had my jobs from those, not necessarily from what I've done in video games, but from the fact that I've got a hang of interactive stuff. And I think it's weird, because I think games, what a sandbox game is a role-playing game. In its almost its purest sense, the chance to take a character and just go with it. And I think games are increasingly becoming more and more like role-playing games. Because an open-ended story, that's a role-playing game. It's do what you think your character would do, or what you want to do. So yeah, if you want to get into games, just write everything and nothing.
Start writing, don't stop.
Get out there, put stuff on paper. And like I say, there are game jams happening all over the country.
Yeah.
You can find them, don't be lazy. And there are guys, you can go along to these things as a writer with no coding experience. I can't code. Go along to these things and say, right, I am a writer. Let me write your quirky character backgrounds. Let me write your dialogue. Let me do whatever you've got, because then you're starting to build a portfolio. And then you can start going to some of the writers' agencies and saying, okay, this is what I've done so far.
Yeah.
would you consider taking me on your books?
It's all about getting that groundwork in.
But yeah, you have, I mean, they might say no, but if they've got the time, and don't expect it, but if they've got the time, they will give you feedback and say, well, what you need is a couple more bigger jobs. The barriers to getting into the industry are just dropping like flies.
Well, on that note, you mentioned you wrote the Dark Harvest tabletop RPG series. Where else can we look to find out more about yourself?
Oh, good. I tweet as Embra again, and I apologise because it's mostly gibberish.
It's Twitter. It's all gibberish.
I've got a blog thing, which is Embra apostrophe again, which has got a whole lot of bits and pieces. I've got so much Star Wars stuff out there, it's not true. I've been doing this writing thing for 17 years, and I worked out the other day that 16 of those years have been writing official Star Wars stuff.
So you've built up a small catalogue then?
Yeah, it's back there somewhere, holding up the roof, I think. So there's that. Yeah, yeah. Have a look at the blog. Have a look at. I'm on LinkedIn. You can have a look at my very bizarre CV. And yeah, I'm around at places.
Well, in that case, Iain, thank you very much for coming on and answering my questions. It's been a pleasure.